Please be seated. Before we get into the sermon, I want to make a quick invitation to you. Next Sunday, we are going to skip church. I don't know if you've seen that or heard of that. We're going to come to this building, and then we're going to get organized, and then we're going to go do projects throughout the community to serve the community, to share Jesus' love in a different way, and at least for a Sunday morning for a Baptist church, right? So we have a lot of different things going on. They're going to tell you all about that, but I hope that you'll be here. We have something for everybody. If you're physically unable to pick up trash or whatever we're going to do, there are other things for you to do. So make it a priority to be here as we take the love of Jesus out to the community next week. So I hope that you'll join us for that. So I struggled this week with what to talk about, so I figured I'd talk about the resurrection. Seemed like the right thing to do. And so just as a little background for us, the disciples had left everything. As Peter approached Jesus one day and said, listen, we've left everything to follow you. And essentially that's what they did. And so they followed Jesus, and then all of a sudden, after doing all of the miracles and all the great things that Jesus had done, the religious leaders couldn't stand him, and they decided to kill him through capital punishment. And so Jesus was put to death and put in a tomb. And the despair that had to be a part of that group was phenomenal. Everything that they had pinned on Jesus, all of their hopes and all of their dreams were now shattered. And the depression had to be incredibly high and very difficult. And so as we read the story in Mark, and Mark's version is frankly is the most bizarre of the four versions, and we'll talk about that as we go through it. But as we look at Mark chapter 16, understand the despair that the people in the story had to have as the story unfolds. I think that really helps us. So we're in Mark chapter 16, page 1022 if you're using the Pew Bible. Mark chapter 16, page 1022 in the Pew Bible, and we'll read the first 8 verses. Mark chapter 16, 1 through 8. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. Don't be alarmed, he said. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Right? There's a lot here and a couple of things that I want to focus on this morning. I think that are very important for us in 2016, and some things that we need to pay attention to as we read this story. And the first thing that I want us to see when we read Mark's story is that it's made very clear that the story of Jesus is a story for everyone, even those who are considered second-class citizens. The story of Jesus is a story for everyone, even those that others look down upon. Now, ladies, apologize for you, but this is a little bit of history for us. Women did not have much position at all in society in Jesus' time. In fact, it was so bad that women got their value based on whom they were married to. Right? In fact, a woman's testimony would not be accepted in a court of law because she was a woman. Right? Get all the anger out. I know that it's there. That's the way it was. Not saying it's right. It just was reality. And so what's interesting about the gospel stories, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John stories, is that it's always women who who are there first. It is women who are the ones who are given the message to go tell everybody. It is women who the angel said, you go tell. Now, that makes no sense from a historical perspective because women's testimony were not accepted. And I think Jesus and I think God was making a very strong statement. This gospel is for everybody. This is everybody's story, regardless of what you think about them, regardless of their standing in society, regardless of where you may place them or how unimportant you may think they are. This is a story for everyone, and it was very consistent with Jesus' teaching. One of the things Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount was he taught about marriage, and he said it's not right for you to divorce a woman for any other reason unless she's unfaithful. And we hold on to that as a teaching about marriage, which it is, but really it was Jesus saying something very radical to the Jewish people. He was saying, listen, you've been divorcing people or divorcing women like they're property. You just don't like how they cook or you don't like the way they look, so you divorce them, give them a certificate, and everything's okay. But Jesus says, no, it's not that way. That's not the way marriage is set up. And Jesus was really establishing rights for women way back when it was very unpopular. And so I think Jesus was, and the story in Mark, it's making it very clear that this gospel message is available and true for every person, regardless of their standing in society. Now, one of the great curses that I have in my life is this, I'm a Dallas Cowboy fan. It's a curse, I admit it. I've tried to get rid of it. I've tried to cheer for other teams, but I always come back. No matter how hard I try, just try, and I can't help it. My first Cowboy game in person was on Thanksgiving Day when I was a little boy, and Clint Longley threw a touchdown pass on the last play, and they beat the Redskins, and it was wonderful. And ever since then, I've been hooked. And no matter how I try to get away from it, I just can't help it. And it's so aggravating. How could a team with so much talent be so bad? Why could you have such a great quarterback whose collarbone is made of paper mache? I don't understand these things. But something happened this week that if it would have happened in the 1970s would have been horrible. This week, the Cowboys in free agency signed Alfred Morris. And why that would have been horrible in the 1970s is because he played for the Redskins. Now, in the 70s and 80s, you just didn't even talk about the Redskins, right? We couldn't stand them. And in fact, until he got traded to the Cowboys, I couldn't stand him. But now he's one of my guys. So he goes from having that silly Indian on the side of his helmet to a star. So he's going to score touchdowns, and I'm going to cheer. And he's going to run over Redskins next year when he plays them twice, and I'm going to be excited about it because he's now playing for the right team. And I say all that to say this. This is how we as a society approach people. We have a tendency to say, if they believe like I believe, they're good people. If they live the way that I live, they're good people. If they can interact with me in the way that they should interact, they're good people. And I think it's important for us to see that the story of the empty tomb is a story for everyone, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of their religious background, regardless of their political party, dare I say, regardless of their family history. The message of Jesus is a message for everybody, even Redskins, as best we understand that. See, and that's how Jesus lived his life, and he modeled that for us on the cross. On the cross, there was two thieves that were being killed with him, and they were outcast in society. They messed up. It's very interesting culturally throughout the world. Stealing's bad. Regardless of the religious belief system, the respecting of other people's property is a big deal in every religion. And so these guys were really looked down upon, and one of them said to Jesus, "Jesus, will you remember me when you're in your kingdom?" And Jesus said, "I promise you today you'll be with me in paradise." A place the world would have said he didn't belong. And if that wasn't enough, Jesus, as he was being crucified, looked at those who decided to kill him and said, "Father, forgive them. They don't understand what they're doing." Because this love for Jesus, this love of God for us, is for everyone. And I think the stories of the gospel make that extremely clear. Well, there's a second thing that I think is real amazing here, because the angel, when he talks to the women, verse 6, he says, "Don't be alarmed," he said. "You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter." Now, I was studying this week and I got stuck on that word. And Peter. Why would the angel have to say and Peter? All right, now we know that not long before this, Peter denied knowing who Jesus was. All right, and after he made this incredibly huge and wrote this incredibly huge verbal check, he said, "I'll die with you even if the rest of these bozos run away." I added bozos. He didn't say that, but basically that's what he said. Rest of them run away. I'll die with you. And he wrote this big verbal check, and it came time to cash it, and he denied knowing who Jesus was. Now, here's the deal. The disciples and Peter wasn't the only one who did something wrong. Other than John, the rest of them ran away and hid. And so I began to think about that. Why did the angel say, "and Peter"? Why Peter? Well, it couldn't have been because the other disciples had cast him out, because they'd done similar things. So there had to be something going on in Peter's brain, that he had disqualified himself to serve. And the message came back from the angel, the disciples and Peter. We're not done with Peter yet. And I think that's huge for us, because regardless of our background, regardless of the mistakes that we've made, regardless of the bad decisions, and we've all made them, the story of the empty tomb is for everyone, even those that have blown it. This morning we want to show you a video. And it's a video that if you've been around, you've seen before, but it's a real powerful story of a lady named Darlene. And so we're going to share Darlene's story with you, and then I'll come back and finish.
Hello, my name is Darlene Muto, and I'm an artist. I've been an artist professionally for about 7 years. I paint on canvas. When I was about 8 years old, I was a victim of incest. I repressed the memory, however, it did change my life significantly. After that happened, I ended up kind of seeking after attention from people. You know, I don't remember my dad around much. He was addicted to heroin, and so I really, really wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be loved, I wanted to be accepted, you know, from men. My mom was there. And so I got into some really bad choices. I got into the sex scene, was a stripper for 5 years. I was a serial dater, which is I just dated, always dating somebody, break up with somebody, immediately date somebody else. I dated women, I've dated men, I've tried everything. I've dyed all my hair for 10 or 15 years. I've pierced about everything you can pierce. I've got tattoos. I was doing a lot of drugs at one point. I drank heavily. I contemplated suicide most of my life, or I dreamt about it. I really daydreamed about it most of my life. It wasn't until about 2007 that I really thought about, hey, you know, I'm kind of sick of this. I've tried everything, even things that I didn't name. There was just so many things that I can't even list them all. And through every single one, I felt like, you know, I'd try this thing and I'd fall back further. And I'd try another thing and I fell back further. It wasn't until I was actually a stripper for 5 solid years, and I started to think about God a little bit. Like, you know, I bet he would be really mad at what I'm doing. I mean, this is like, you know, like it's kind of like prostitution, except for, you know, you're on a stage, you know. And I thought, you know, I really hated that I was doing that and I was lying to my family. And so I stopped I stopped really working. I kind of hid in the dressing room and cried a lot and asked God to forgive me, and then I'd have to go on stage. Still had to do it. And then it wasn't until I, met some guy there, which is a terrible idea, moved to Florida, found out he was cheating on me the entire time. Then I moved out, started drinking very heavily. I practically didn't eat. All I did was drink Jaeger. And in the fog, I really don't remember much. All I remember is drinking and sleeping in my car because I didn't want to drive home. And sometimes people would drive me home, and I don't remember where my car was the next morning. My relationship with God before I actually was really seeking Him. I went to a couple youth things with a friend, and it sounded really interesting, like, oh, this guy loves me, like, weird, okay, but I didn't understand it. I didn't really get that, like, why he loves me, what it was that, made him want to love me. I didn't understand that because he forgave me of my sins, that I could actually forgive myself of my sins. I really, really didn't get that for a very long time. And so I would basically be like, God help me with this, but then I would still go do whatever I wanted to. And I never really thought about, the things that I was doing as, I didn't really feel guilty until it was much later that I started realizing, like, I bet God would be really mad at me, and then I would be like, forgive me, but, I'm going to go back and do this anyways. So I was driving, and I drove past the sign in front of this church, and what it said caught my eye, there's a lot of churches that you drive by here. But this one sign caught my eye, and I thought, I really need to hear what they have to say about that. I can't remember exactly what it said, but I know it had something to do with, like, either being lost or being depressed or suicide, something along the lines. I remember just thinking, like, I really need to check that out. And I thought, well, it's really nerve-wracking to, first off, be sober and walk into a church after you drink, the night before until oblivion. So there's this massive amount of anxiety that I was having. I was panicking. I probably gave up going to church probably 5 times before I actually got there, thinking, no, and I can't. No, I got to. No, I can't. I walked in, and I sat in the back row, and there's this woman, Pat, that greeted me. And I was kind of like, oh, don't talk to me. Don't even look at me. It probably smelled like booze. And so I sat in the back row, and they was talking about exactly what I was going through. Like, it felt like he was talking directly to me. It totally freaked me out. But in a good way, because all the other times of trying to, fill this emptiness, fill this void, someone give me attention, someone connect with me, I couldn't find it. But this one day I walk in there, I'm sitting in the back row, and somebody's talking about exactly what I'm going through. I thought, whoa, this is weird. So I was trying not to cry because I felt so moved. And I was trying to not let anybody know, that it was really moving me. And then I ended up coming back the next week because I really wanted to hear what else they had to say. A woman at the door knew my name. She actually memorized my name, which is pretty crazy. I was like, well, someone cares about me enough to memorize my name? Wow. And I sat in the back row, cried again. It was like the same story. It was like the same story for probably a few weeks. And little by little, I started to feel accepted, loved. And I wasn't dressing up, I was wearing jeans and probably a band t-shirt, and nobody cared, That was a really big deal because I was so afraid they'd, reject me. I also had piercings. I had my septum pierced and my lip pierced, and my ears were all big and stuff, and nobody cared. It was weird, but it was nice, It's the first time in my life that someone actually seemed like they truly cared. And when I left, I wasn't emptier than when I went in. I was fuller. And it took a while, maybe a few months to where I was like, okay, this is what I want. This is real. You know, I was starting to feel whole. You know, I wasn't going out seeking to fill something anymore. I felt new, and the things that I've done in the past and all that, I didn't feel like the same person anymore. It was very, very intense. I almost didn't even know how to handle it, you know, because, you know, this person that I had like created, and I had like tried to be this one person, and I like this kind of music, and I like, you know, these things, and I like this color, and I like to wear this type of stuff, and I tried to form this person and create this person, and it took me so long to create this image that now I was like, I don't want it anymore. That didn't do anything good for me. Okay, so before I felt like I needed to be accepted by men. I needed to be accepted, I needed to be beautiful, I needed to be exactly what they wanted. I wanted to be accepted so bad. I got myself into really big messes. The thing is like I had this searching. I moved on a regular basis, almost every year, moved to a new city, try out this, try out that, everything. But everything, I felt like it was leading me deeper and darker. I got more depressed. I hated myself more and more. I would turn all my anger inward. It was overwhelming. I mean, the littlest things overwhelmed me. I couldn't do hardly anything without just giving up, you know. And then when I actually understood what was, you know, what Christ is saying, and He forgives me and He actually loves me, then I didn't have to search, you know, in these dark, crazy places for this love that never, ever even, I couldn't even find it. Whatever I thought was, you know, oh, this is, someone loves me, someone likes me, ended up turning around and stabbing me in the back every time. But so when I really understood, you know, Christ's love, and He forgives me, and if He forgives me of all those things, I should forgive me.
Thank you, Darlene, for sharing your story with us. But here's what I want you to see. So many times we get this idea that our background or what has happened to us or what we've done disqualifies us from a relationship with God. But that's not the story of Jesus at all. See, the story of Jesus is for everyone, down and out, those who have it together, for everybody. And I think that's huge for us to see. I want to wrap this up real quick. I want you to look at the end of the story, how Mark finishes it. It's very interesting. Verse 8, talking about the women, trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Now, if you read the little inscription there right below that, it says the earliest manuscripts and some other ancient witnesses do not have verses 9 through 20. And if you do a little research, and I won't bore you with the details, but it's a pretty consistent belief now for most scholars that 9 through 20 were added later by someone else. All right? And we can have that discussion later, but I began to think about that. If that's true, why did Mark stop where he stopped? Why didn't he tell us the rest of the story? It's like there's an empty tomb. The women ran away. So I began to process that and began to ask, why would somebody do that? And then I began to think, you know what? It was literary genius. Because Mark looked at the world and he said, there's an empty tomb. What are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it? You see, really, there's a couple of responses when you think about an empty tomb. There's one, it didn't really happen, or it did. Now, historically, many have tried to disprove even the existence of Jesus and the existence of the empty tomb, but historically, it's pretty obvious that Jesus not only lived, but he died, was buried, and there's an empty tomb. And you can try to explain it away. In Islam, the idea that they teach is that Jesus, when he was on the cross, was able to go in such a deep trance that seemed like he was dead, but he really wasn't. And they placed him in the tomb, and the cool of the tomb made him wake up, and he came out. The Jews try to teach that disciples came and stole the body. The only logical problem with that is the idea that these guys then decided they'd die for something they knew was a lie. Others have tried to say they just went to the wrong tomb, which would lead you to say, well, where's the body? But then there's the other possibility. Jesus conquered death. What do you do with that? If something really supernatural happened, what does it mean? You see, it suddenly means that everything Jesus taught becomes the most important thing that's ever been said. It suddenly means that I really ought to build my life around him and his teaching. It suddenly means that I have something specific to live for. If it really happened, if the tomb is really empty, because Jesus conquered death, it should change everything about your life. Because everything about your life should be built around him and his story. So I'll leave you with this question today, the one that Mark implied. What are you going to do with an empty tomb? Let's pray.